When Game of Thrones began, it followed the well-established A Song of Ice and Fire book series closely. Season 1 started and ended in exactly the same ways, with little deviation between, as the first novel of Game of Thrones. Unfortunately, the world of the novels only expanded from there, while the TV series, initially, ran into things like budgets and deadlines. Accommodating these meant that the writers had to create their own material, and some of their own characters, which became ingrained in the larger story. It became clear in Season 4, and really earlier, that showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss would put their own twist on George R.R. Martin's story. Part of that was unavoidable, as Martin has continued to frustrate fans by taking his time on the remaining 2 novels. But part of it was decisions made in the writer's room to actively distance themselves from the base story. Some of the most infuriating stories, especially in Seasons 4 and 5, came from the minds of David and Dan, including most of Arya's journey with the Hound and the entire Dorne debacle. But at the same time, relatively few readers took issue with their decision to cut Dany's time in Meereen short, or the entire Hardhome battle. But what goes too far and what goes just far enough? In other words, when do these changes stop becoming an adaptation of George R.R. Martin's books and start becoming something too much like fanfiction? You could make the argument that the fanfictionizing for The Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones began all the way back in Season 2. That was when the decision was made to make Tyrion Lannister really the main character of the story. He was never that central in the books. Yes, he was a main character, but rarely the main character. He spent quite a bit of time reacting to what others did, and only rarely drove his own story. After the way the character, and Peter Dinklage's performance, was received in Season 1, it seemed like the writers made a conscious effort to feature him more in Season 2 and onward. Also in the second season they introduced Brienne of Tarth. The Brienne on the show is a perfectly fine character. She's strong, she's honorable, and she's dedicated to completing her mission, as it were. All of those things could come from the Brienne in the books as well, but the Brienne who appears on screen is very much a different character. Where the Brienne in the show felt an immediate, almost kinship with Arya when they met, the Brienne of the books actually shared more with Sansa, in terms of her worldview. She was in love with Renly in part because he danced with her at a ball when she was younger, making her feel like less of an outsider among the other girls there. And she continued to look at the world assuming things would work out like a fairy tale, similar to how Sansa did for quite a while. But Brienne's change was not the most egregious, or noticeable change that the writers clearly made because they wanted to rather than because it served the story. The biggest offender in this situation has to be the entire Dorne storyline. When Oberyn appeared in Season 4, he was instantly a fan favorite. And a good part of that was because his character was pretty faithful to what it was in the books. Unfortunately, his appeal motivated the writers to bring in quite a bit more from the Dorne storyline, and change it as they did so. The names of those characters were the same in the books and in the show, but not many other connections could be seen. In the books, Ellaria was appalled at the implication that she, or the others, would hurt Myrcella, and openly against the thought of war with the Lannisters. Tyene was, at least on the surface, quiet. She was the daughter of a septa, and had the training to pass for one when needed, even if she lacked the disposition. Obari might have been rendered the closest to her book counterpart, as she always considered herself a warrior. This was all the more unnecessary because there was a semi-well-rounded character down there they could have used. Arianne Martell, the Princess of Dorne, did not even appear in the show, and for no good reason. Perhaps the fact that she actually had something of a presence established in the books actually made them less inclined to use her because they couldn't make her into the character they wanted as easily. Essentially what the writers on Game of Thrones did was pick specific character traits from each of the women, meld them into one, and then put that character in the story 4 times, once for each Sand Snake, once for Ellaria. If changing the established characters to that degree, so really the name is all that carries over, isn't fanfiction, it's very, very close. It's hard to definitively say that anything on Game of Thrones for the past 2 seasons has been fanfiction worthy or not, simply because the source material for it does not exist. At least not to us commoners who don't have access to George R.R. Martin. But some of it has certainly felt that way, and isn't taking the author's characters and using them to finish his story and make it end the way you want exactly what fanfiction does. Martin may have told David Benioff and Dan Weiss how he plans to end it, but that doesn't mean they will do the same. In fact, in a recent interview, he admitted that he didn't know how the show ended, and that parts of it would not reflect what's to come in the novels. Next, how Game of Thrones changed Jojen Reed's story. The final season of Game of Thrones premieres April 14 on HBO.